Meeting is being recorded. I put okay, right? Okay.
This is it.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to our open book. Please do let us know if you're getting us, audio, video, all of that. We have look, all of our guests are distinguished, but we have a particularly distinguished guest tonight, Viet Thanh Nguyen, who, of course, is a Pulitzer Prize winner for his debut novel, This is Sympathizer. Won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. I could go on. A Guggenheim Fellowship, a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. Just one of the great authors in the world right now. And a couple of weeks ago, I noticed a particularly arresting article that our friends, the Paris Review, had run. And it's part of a basis for a book, To Save and to Destroy Writing as the Other, which has just come out based on the Norton lectures that Mr. Nguyen gave at Harvard. And we welcome him from his office at USC. Thanks so much for being with us.
Scott, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
You are one of the great writers in the world, but can I get you to recount a little bit of your personal history? For those who may not know, arriving in the United States in 1975 as a child.
I was born in Vietnam to parents who were ardent anti-communists, but also devout Catholics. And of course, in 1975, we were on the losing side, and we made a very dramatic escape from Vietnam to get to the United States. I don't remember any of that. I was actually present for the fall of Saigon in Saigon, but at 4 years of age, I have no memory of that. So, part of my work has grappled with what it means to be present for a history that one can't claim to be an eyewitness to. Where my memories started were in a refugee camp in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So the 130,000 Vietnamese refugees who fled in 1975 ended up in one of four camps in the United States. Mine was Fort Indiantown Gap outside of Harrisburg. And my memories begin being separated from my parents because in order to leave these camps, Vietnamese people had to have Americans willing to sponsor them. There wasn't an American willing to sponsor all four of us, so one sponsor took my parents, one sponsor took my 10-year-old brother, one sponsor took 4-year-old me, and my memories begin howling and screaming as I'm taken from my parents.
I guess I've always wanted the chance to ask you this. Were you, as keeping notes even then, was there a part of you that was thinking someday I'm going to tell this story?
I don't think so. I think obviously I go back to this idea from Nietzsche that what burns us stays in our memory. So, when I look back upon my own life, the things that tend to stand out are the unhappy memories, the memories that are painful in some ways. And I think that I did not really start to think that I would write about my life until I got to university and started thinking of myself as a serious kind of writer. I wasn't a serious writer, but I thought of myself as a serious writer and started to write a little bit non-fictionally about what it meant to be a refugee, to be a Vietnamese person, to be an Asian American in the United States. And that included dealing with some of my family history and the emotional devastation wreaked by the war and its aftermath on my parents and therefore on me as well.
One of the things you write about in this book is the effect of the killing of Vincent Chin in 1982 in Michigan. If I could get you to talk about that.
I wasn't aware of the Vincent Chin murder when it took place. Obviously, it is an incident or an event that is part of the Asian American canon now in terms of landmark moments of anti-Asian violence that Asian Americans turn to. And so you have to remember that in 1982, the United States was undergoing a lot of economic problems, which included the automobile industry feeling under threat from Japanese competition and the appearance of Honda and Toyota and things like that. And so there was a lot of anti-Japanese feeling being expressed. So racism merged and xenophobia merging with economic fear and competition. And of course, this was felt especially deeply in a place like Detroit, where the automobile industry was or is. And Vincent Chin was this young man who was actually Chinese American. And on a certain night in 1982, he was out celebrating his bachelor party. And he got into an argument with two unemployed white auto workers. And one thing led to another, and they beat him to death with a baseball bat. And the long and the short of it is that they were never sent to prison for what they did. And the sense of injustice that many Asian Americans felt about this led to a reinvigoration of the Asian American movement. And that obviously would influence me by the time I went to school at UC Berkeley in 1990 and became an ethnic studies major, very much interested in Asian American experiences and Asian American history. But I don't think it was until I got to Berkeley that I learned about the Vincent Chin murder, even though I was obviously alive at the time.
Help us understand the otherness that you write about.
I mean, even to go from that example of the Vincent Chin murder, I mean, here's a guy, Vincent Chin, who was, and is an American, and his name is Vincent. His last name happens to be Chin. But these auto workers thought he, who was a Chinese American, was a Japanese person, and they killed him for that. It wouldn't have been any better if they killed him for being Chinese. But I mean, what we see there is that sense of enduring racism directed against Asians in the United States, no matter how long they've been in the United States. And it's a process of multiple kinds of misidentifications. Number one, mistaking a Chinese for a Japanese American, and number two, mistaking either one for not being American, and therefore, being vulnerable to all kinds of violence. In this case, actually murderous violence, which I see as absolutely connected to the violence that the United States has waged in its wars against and with Asian countries, including Japan and China. And so for me, I grew up in this environment where, for me, the war that mattered was the Vietnam War, and so many Asians are here in the United States because of various kinds of wars. And that was how I experienced my otherness, and otherness that was both racial and national, but also tied to things like warfare as well. And obviously, when you're 4 or 10 or 15, it's very hard to articulate these kinds of things. But I've spent decades, beginning with my time at Berkeley, and as a student, and then as a writer and a scholar, trying to understand how fundamental otherness is to the United States. That I think we are a country that's built upon some wonderful ideals, but we've also been a country that has required various kinds of others throughout its history, from the very beginnings with indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans up until the present, with undocumented migrants and Latinos and Asian immigrants and refugees and so on. The definition of our national identity has so often been shaped against certain kinds of others. And if you happen to be, as I am, an individual who is both an American and an other, that friction can be very intense. It doesn't have to be explicitly violent or even explicitly racist, but I think I grew up in the 1980s feeling this sense of racism out there, even if I was never actually personally targeted. I like to say that, racism can also be long distance racism as well, that you experience through the airwaves and through images and things like that. No one actually has to say a racist or othering statement to you individually. It's already there saturating the popular culture.
Um, One of the things you talk, obviously, many things you talk about is a lot of the great books and great films that in the United States we think are about the war in Vietnam are actually about Americans in Vietnam.
I don't think that's a surprise. I don't think Americans are unique in terms of being guilty of ethnocentrism. It's probably true of every nation and every culture, but of course, I feel it particularly poignantly when it comes to the Vietnam War, because even the name of the war is Vietnam. But in the United States, the Vietnam War really means the American War. What did the war mean for Americans? And in one sense, again, that's perfectly understandable. But if you are a Vietnamese refugee and a Vietnamese American in the United States, inevitably you feel that conflict or that friction between the way that Americans have experienced and represented this war and the way that you yourself might have. But there's I think an even more serious meaning to this, which is that I think that the United States got involved in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, partly due to geopolitical reasons, but also partly due to American ignorance of the countries and regions and peoples that they were getting involved in. And so the American retrospective memory about this war that's focused on American experience repeats the American ethnocentrism that got the United States into Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in the first place. And therefore, that ethnocentrism that becomes repeated in terms of how Americans reflect upon the war and try to make sense out of it, that leads us to further wars where we continue to make, from my point of view, the same kinds of ethnocentric and nationalist kinds of mistakes in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
I, I want to read from a section you wrote here, um, if I may.
Sure.
We are valedictorians, salutatorians, celebrities, influencers, actors, chefs, politicians, writers. We are your doctors, radiologists, internists, optometrists, dentists, pharmacists, nurses. We take your blood pressure, give you injections, Empty your bedpans. We look into each and every part of you. We tutor you in math and play your classical music. We kneel at your feet to do your pedicures. We dry clean your clothes. We introduce you to acupuncture and yoga and martial arts. But we have been so successful in these endeavors, we probably no longer teach you yoga or martial arts, since you like to teach them yourselves. We gave you an incredible array of spices, flavors, and dishes without which your lives, diets, and palates would be much blander. We design your microchips and program your code. We become objects of your fantasies and desires. We smile and reassure you. We serve as your excuses to end affirmative action. We are your friendly competition until we are too much competition. That's breathtaking.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. I think breathtaking hopefully is a good thing, you know.
Yeah. Now,
Uh,
I did like it. The part that makes me not uncomfortable. A lot of groups who've come to America have felt that.
oh yeah. I think there's a commonality of experiences for people who have been treated as other in some way. And you know, that's not just a matter of like stereotype and representation and exclusion, but it's also a matter of exploitation of people's labor as well. So I think there's a shared commonality. Now, that being said, I think there's also very specific kinds of differences. So the various kinds of things I talk about in that passage are things that are identified with Asian immigrants, Asian refugees,
Yeah,
Asian.
Jews have never been known as yoga teachers.
Yeah, exactly. Or you
No,
know,
and I apologize in advance if I have overlooked somebody, but in any event, yes, please go ahead.
no, but I mean, it's true. Like, you know, certain populations are identified with certain kinds of
Yeah,
function, economic and cultural functions that they do in American culture. And these, what you just read, that passage is the stereotypical things that Asians and Asian Americans are involved with. So I think it's important to, you know, run through the specificity of things, but also recognize that every immigrant and refugee group that comes to the United States, or people who are not immigrants or refugees, like enslaved Africans, you know, they fulfill certain kinds of economic, political, cultural needs for this country. And that becomes embedded in the way that they are perceived and misrepresented or stereotyped and so on. And so it's a very serious thing, obviously, but also there's an amount of humor that has to be felt in that. I see it anyway. And you know, I throughout much of my work, I try to retain a sense of humor and a sense of
mhm.
absurdity and a sense of satire in order for people to better understand, for me to understand and cope with these kinds of things, but for readers to understand and cope with these kinds of things as well. It would be one thing for me to get up here and just sort of berate people about, you know, how Asians been misrepresented or mistreated. It's another thing to also say, we can make a joke about it as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess the part that I'm trying to get around, and I bring it to you, is that on the other hand, whatever our endless infractions and outright sins, isn't that also the glory of America? That people come here and strive, and the next generation is better off than the one who, I mean, I could go on, that you could certainly, the Irish side of my family, the Spanish Jewish side of my family, they felt lucky
Yeah,
with a
I,
chance.
I hope so. I mean, like I think that many of us who are immigrants and refugees have been the beneficiary of this kind of narrative and reality of possibility, and I've certainly benefited from that as well. I think also what I wrestle with, and what this book wrestles with, and what my previous, well, all my books really, but the last book, A Man of Two Faces, wrestles with is the fact that the United States of America, is built on structural contradiction that I think it's hard for Americans.
Oh, yeah, sorry, we're moving the camera to show you.
Oh yeah, thank you. Right, yeah, of course. That's my dad actually. Some people sometimes think that's me, but that's my father in his 30s before he was a father. Um, and so, you know, the book is very much about him as well. But you know, I mean, the structural contradiction, right? I mean, I think Americans want to look back on their past and say, you know, yes, there's been racism, et cetera, all forms of exploitation and war, but it's also a country of opportunity. And those things can be true. I also think, though, that there's a way in which that structural contradiction between the foundation of the country in opportunity and freedom and democracy and all these wonderful things, those things were only made possible by the brutality of the enslavement and genocide and colonization and war. Now, that I think Americans have a hard time recognizing. The distinction between saying, well, you know, we've made some mistakes versus saying structurally, none of the things that are great about America would have been possible without all the horrible things about the United States. And that structural contradiction is still with us today. I mean, if we talk about Donald Trump and what he represents, I don't think it's an accident. I think it may be an extreme outcome, but it is an outcome of this contradiction that's already here in the United States from the very origins.
What are some of the books and authors that have meant a lot to you as you've thought this through?
I mean, there's been, when I was growing up as this refugee in San Jose, California, I found refuge in the San Jose Public Library. I just read everything, but none of what I was read was really meant for Vietnamese refugee boys. That meant I was reading Charles Dickens and William Thackeray and Jane Austen and the English Romantic and Victorian poets and all this kind of stuff, and it was wonderful. And they weren't meant for me, but I connected with them anyway. And so I hope that.
May I interrupt you for a moment? What do you mean they weren't meant for you?
Well, I don't think Charles Dickens was sitting there thinking one day a Vietnamese refugee boy in California is going to be reading me, right? So I think all writers have some
No,
sense.
no, but I mean, the more the merrier. Wouldn't Dickens think I want everyone in the world to read this book?
Absolutely, the more the merrier. But also, what that means is who should a
As long
writer
as they pay for it, yeah.
who should a
Yeah.
writer write for? And can you anticipate who all your readers are going to be? And the reason I bring that up is because so many writers, when they're trying to get published, people ask them, "Who are you writing for?" And it's such a stupid question, I think, because, well, every writer should really just be writing for themselves. And then everything else is a concentric circle of possible audiences. And the reason I'm bringing this up, in response to your
Mhm.
question, is to say I could read Charles Dickens, I could read Jane Austen, I could read Herman Melville, William Faulkner, I could read all those people. Therefore, I hope one day people who would have no idea that they could connect with a Vietnamese refugee writer or a Vietnamese American or an Asian American could read my work or the work of someone like me and just like feel, an incredible moment of connection. And so when you ask me who have I read, I think about that because I think that I have read people who probably weren't thinking about me, and I have read people who might have been thinking about me as well. So that would include writers like Maxine on Kingston and Amy Tan and Toni Morrison as well. So the whole point is that when I say who has influenced me, it's this broad spectrum of people, everybody from the so-called, canon of the Anglo-American canon, to the whole diversity of American literature.
Is there at the same time a pride in otherness?
I think so because
Particularly for a novelist or I'll say a journalist, the outsider's eye?
I don't know if pride is the right word. I think that I'm proud of being Vietnamese, for example.
Yeah.
Like I'm proud of like certain kinds of cultures, and we should all be proud of certain kinds of cultural, histories and traits that we have. Am I proud of being an other? I don't know about that. I think what I am is I'm defiant about being an other. I think one response to being treated as an other is to retreat from that and to be apologetic and and try to hide yourself and to accommodate yourself to whatever dominant structure of power and culture you find yourself in. And that I think is, I don't know if it's shame or if it's strategy, but I try to refuse those things. And so it's not about being proud as an other. It's about being defiant of the fact that my otherness is something that I choose, but is something that also has been imposed on me. And in this book, the one that you had, To Save and to Destroy, I
Mhm.
talk about how there's at least a spectrum of otherness. All of us feel other at some moment in our lives. So there's a universal condition of otherness. Okay. But oftentimes that otherness is individually felt like I feel like a geek. I feel like an outsider in some ways. I don't fit into my high school.
I,
But
I mean, we've got, in addition to your book, I have books by authors behind me. Fitzgerald and Hemingway felt like they didn't fit.
exactly. So, I mean, I think even to be an author of a certain kind, you're probably a weirdo in some way. Okay. So you could look at the whole canon of literature, I mean, and like, okay, and think, well, yes, we're reading like Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky's a part of the canon. That guy was like really weird. Okay. And that's what constitutes so many writers, our otherness as an individual. However, that also has to be considered in relationship to otherness that is imposed as a collective. All right. So Hemingway and Fitzgerald, yes, they were they were odd in their own ways for sure, but they're also white guys in the United States. I don't think they experienced that layer of otherness
Mhm.
that like a black person would at that time. You just read Fitzgerald and Hemingway; they're definitely they've got problems when it comes to racial representation or gendered representation. So that's a really crucial distinction to draw is that spectrum from individual otherness to a collectively imposed otherness.
Do you like the miniseries of The Sympathizer?
I am way too close to that miniseries to tell you whether it is good or bad or where it fits
Our
on.
director is sitting across from me, clasping her heart.
Yes.
What, really? Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
don't know what that means. Is she having a heart
Oh
attack?
no, she loves it. She loves it.
I have to say, not my show, but the opening scene or some of the opening scenes, I was not alive for the fall of Vietnam, but I was very much alive and very much attached to the fall of Kabul.
Yeah.
And what I saw during those moments and versus what I saw on the miniseries took my breath away.
I am very happy in that sense. Not about all the history.
Yes.
Not
But yeah,
it,
it took my breath away. Yeah.
And you know the best way of registering your pleasure at seeing the miniseries?
By the book.
I'm about to say, buy 10 copies and get them. Yeah.
I gave that book out so
Did
many.
you? I
Yeah,
didn't
of
know that.
course.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. One
It's
of
a
the
great
gratifying
book.
Well, yeah, but I mean, one of the gratifying things about the adaptation was so many people saying, "Well, we haven't watched it yet because we need to read the book first." I was like, "Well, good for you. I'm glad that you have your priorities straight. Why haven't you read the book already?" But it is gratifying to know that for a lot of people, they do have this sense that they need to read the book first. Anyway, I'm too close to it. What I can tell you is that I'm happy with the outcome of it. We had certain principles in the making of the series. We had certain kinds of collaborators we wanted to work with, and we hit those targets. We got to work with Park Chan-wook. Park Chan-wook was my first choice as director and showrunner, co-showrunner for the series. He made Old Boy, The Handmaiden. I think he's like one of the two most important Korean directors in the world, along with Bong Joon-ho. We got him, I mean, like, that's amazing. And we did this thing primarily in the Vietnamese language, and we have a primarily Vietnamese cast. So even though a lot of the conversation was about, oh, Robert Downey Jr. plays all the white guys, which was Park Chan-wook's idea, and that's a lot of fun, we have that, and who can say that they got to make a TV series with Robert Downey Jr. and we got to have a primarily Vietnamese diaspora and Vietnamese national cast.
Well, I'm so glad we could talk to you tonight. To Save and to Destroy Writing is another, the Norton Lectures from Viet Thanh Nguyen, Harvard University Press, if I'm not mistaken.
Harvard University Press. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad we could talk to you. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for being on our open book through, I think these are 3 different platforms tonight.
We're 2 live and 3 in the next hour.
2 live and 3 in the next hour. Oh, mercy.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope at least a couple of them work.
So far, all seem to
But
be.
it's been a real honor to be able to roll it out with today's.
Always great to come back and talk to you, Scott.
Thanks so much. See you later. Take care. Thanks everyone for being on our open book.